All right, graphing absolute value. For this, I really think the best way to do it is just by a table of values. So pretty much all of these graphs, you're going to see that I've done a table of values. An absolute value graph, just before we get started, actually looks almost exactly like a quadratic, except for it's pointy. So when I'm teaching this, like a lot of the times when I teach grade 11, I'll introduce this graph and I'll just say that it's the pointy quadratic. If you look at a quadratic, it should always be rounded at the bottom. An absolute value graph should always be pointy at the bottom. Because of this, if I go in the positive values, it's always going to be 1 equals 1, y equals x, 1 equals 1, 2 equals 2, and so on. If I go in the negative values, well, the negative values are where we get the positive versions. There we go. Y equals negative 2, if I sub that in, is going to become 2. Negative 1 would become 1 because they're within the bracket and therefore they're just becoming positive. So if I were to graph this, we just get a pointy quadratic. It looks almost like a quadratic. Obviously the points aren't the exact same. We're not going over 1 up 1, over 2 up 4, or 1, 2, 3. It's just going up by the values of the graph. However, it does look kind of like a pointy quadratic. Just talking about general shape here. If we look at 2x, if we're talking about it being a quadratic, well, typically 2 would, in the front here, that a value would stretch it vertically. So we're going to do probably the same thing. If we look at our values, well, 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. Well, that's going to give me positive 4 over here. 2 times negative 1 is going to be negative 2. Put it in the brackets, it's positive 2. So if we look at the graph, it is exactly what we would expect. It's just a graph that's been stretched vertically. Okay, all of these values have just been stretched up. Again, pointy quadratic. The next one here, if we think of, let's think of it as a quadratic. We'll actually graph it first and then we'll go back to the table of values. Well, quadratic, if I had something inside the brackets, that would move me 1, 2, 3 to the right, and then I would graph it. So here I've moved 1, 2, 3 to the right, and then graphed my standard absolute value graph. 5, I've kind of adjusted my scale here, or adjusted the values I've put into my table. Just knowing that it had moved over 3, I adjusted it so that it would look a little cleaner. But 5 minus 3 is 2. 5 minus 3 is 2. 5 minus 3 is 2. 4 minus 3 is 1. 3 minus 3 is 0. Here's where it kind of gets interesting, or a little bit tricky. 2 minus 3 is negative 1, and negative 1 is going to become positive 1. Okay, so again, we get that same value. Oh no. Oh yeah, that's right. Excuse me. And then again, think of this quadratic, or the pointy quadratic, as I've been saying. This would just be moved down 2 when we graph it. That's exactly what's happened. Okay, we look at our table of values, sub in our values. Here I'm going to use just the standard negative 2 to positive 2 values. And I'm going to then negative 2 becomes 2. 2 minus 2 is 0. Negative 1 becomes 1. 1 minus 2 is negative 1. 0 would obviously be 0. 1 is 1, and 2 is 2. So I get the same graph. Looking at this one, a little bit different, but it's going to be moved up 4. That negative is going to flip it down. So let's look at the table of values first. Again, negative 2 to 2. Negative 2 becomes 2. That negative is going to make it negative 2, plus 4 is going to be 2. And so on. If you go through all of these values, you would see this. And then there's my graph. Okay? It behaves exactly the same as a quadratic, just obviously different general shape. And with that being said, A out front is the vertical stretch or compression. It also actually shows us whether it's facing up or down. So facing up or up is a positive A value, and facing down would be a negative A value. Okay, the C is going to give me my horizontal shift. It's always the opposite inside the bracket, so if it was negative C, I'd go positive. If it was positive C, I'd go negative. And the D value is the vertical shift. It's just going to be up or down exactly the same as it's written.